Mr. Cole, think hard. Accuse Whitmore again, and if you're wrong, I'll recommend perjury. That felony follows you forever.
I've been sitting behind this bench for over 40 years. In that time, I've watched thousands of people walk into my courtroom. I've seen their shoulders held high with arrogance, their eyes lowered in shame, or their hands shaking so violently they could barely hold their own legal paperwork. Some come in guilty, some come in terrified, and some come in just plain angry at the entire world. But there is one thing I absolutely cannot stand, one thing that makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It's when someone tries to turn my courtroom into their personal playground. Justice isn't a game, and the robe I wear isn't a costume. It happened on a Tuesday, April 14th, in Providence, Rhode Island. The morning had already been long, filled with the usual hum of administrative delays and minor disputes. My clerk called case number 22 TR 61804. I remember the exact time on the courtroom clock, 10:47 a.m. I don't remember it because I'm obsessed with schedules, but because that was the exact minute the air in the room changed. It went from the stale smell of old paper and coffee to something sharp, something cold. On paper, the case looked like a routine hit and run. No major injuries, just property damage and a complaining witness. Odie. But I've learned something important in my 4 decades of law. When a file looks simple, but the defendant walks in dressed like they're heading to a high-fashion gala, it is almost never simple. The defendant's name was Chase Whitmore, 28 years old. He didn't walk to the defense table, he strutted. His haircut was so sharp it looked like it had been measured with a laser-guided ruler. His teeth were blindingly white, like a billboard smile you'd see on a California highway. He was wearing a black Balenciaga hoodie that probably cost more than my first car, a Rolex Daytona that caught the overhead lights like a signal flare, and a Gucci belt with gold letters so big they practically shouted his status to the gallery. He didn't look like a man facing criminal consequences. He looked like he was attending a VIP event where he was the guest of honor. Behind him, his attorney was whispering frantically, "Chase, please, just stay calm." But Chase just waved him off like he was a waiter bringing a cold steak. Then, he did the one thing that truly set the tone. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of Lamborghini keys, the ones with the little bull logo, and set them right on the defense table like a trophy. He wanted me to see them. He wanted the room to be impressed by the weight of his wallet. But while he was busy performing for the room, I was looking at the woman sitting on the other side. Her name was Elena Marquez, 36 years old, a nurse at Rhode Island Hospital. She had just come from a 1-2-hour night shift. She was wearing plain scrubs under a faded winter coat, her hands gripping a small folder like it was the only thing keeping her life from falling apart. Her shoes were worn down at the toes, not dirty, just tired, just like the look in her eyes. She didn't have a high-priced attorney. She didn't have a Rolex. She had a small silver cross around her neck and the quiet strength of someone who has had to fight for everything she's ever owned. I asked her, "Miss Marquez, are you here as the complaining witness?" She nodded, her voice soft but steady. "Yes, Your Honor." That's the kind of strength I respect, the kind that shows up when it's exhausted, the kind that doesn't need to be loud to be heard. As the proceedings began, I could feel the tension ratcheting up. Leonard Pike, the assistant district attorney, stood up, adjusting his tie with a look of clinical indifference. He was about to start a sequence of events that would force me to remind everyone in that room exactly why the law exists and why a Lamborghini doesn't buy you an inch of ground in my court. Elena Marquez took the stand, not with the confidence of someone used to public speaking, but with the desperate clarity of a mother protecting her child. I asked her to walk me through the night in question. She took a breath that seemed to shake her whole frame. This all started on the night of March 2nd at exactly 10:47 p.m. Elena had just finished a grueling shift and had parked her 2012 Honda Civic on Atwells Avenue. She wasn't there for leisure. She had run into a small corner pharmacy to pick up medicine for her son Mateo, who suffers from severe asthma. She told me she had 2 inhalers in that small paper bag, one rescue inhaler and one daily maintenance inhaler. She remembered the exact cost, $38.60 after insurance. She remembered that number like it was burned into her memory because, for her, That wasn't just spare change, it was a calculated expense in a month already stretched too thin. She walked back out to the street, clutching that bag, and that's when the world turned upside down. She saw her car, her lifeline jerk forward violently, like it had been shoved by a giant, invisible hand. Then came the sound, metal on metal, the kind of screeching, tearing noise that makes your stomach drop to your shoes. A bright green Lamborghini Urus, loud as a thunderclap and aggressive as a wild animal, had clipped the rear of her Civic while trying to squeeze into a spot it had no business occupying. The force of the impact sent her car jumping the curb, shattering the taillight into 100 red shards on the pavement. But what happened next was the part that truly revealed character. Instead of stopping, instead of checking to see if anyone was hurt, the driver revved the engine. It was a roar of indifference. He swerved back into the lane and sped off into the night. Elena told me she ran after it. In that moment, she wasn't thinking like a lawyer building a case. She was thinking like a mom who couldn't afford a repair deductible and definitely couldn't afford to miss work the next day. Officer Daniel Riley, badge number 271, responded to the scene. His report was clear. The SUV accelerated eastbound at a high rate of speed, estimated at 55 miles per hour in a 25 mile per hour zone. And that's not just negligence, that is a complete disregard for human life. As Elena recounted this, I watched Chase Whitmore. You learn a lot about a man by watching how he listens to the damage he caused. Chase didn't look remorseful. He didn't look concerned. He leaned back in his chair and sighed, looking at the ceiling like he was bored, waiting for a table at a restaurant. To him, a broken taillight was nothing. To Elena, that car was how she got to work, how she took her son to appointments. She explained that her husband had left 2 years ago, leaving her with no support, financial or otherwise. She picked up extra shifts just to keep the lights on. She wasn't asking for pity. She was explaining why one broken taillight feels like a punch to the throat when you are already drowning. I looked directly at the defendant. "Mr. Whitmore, do you understand the charge?" I asked, my voice dropping an octave. He looked at me and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a smug, practiced expression of someone who believes they are untouchable. "I understand people exaggerate, Judge," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. His lawyer quickly jumped in, clearing his throat nervously. "Your Honor, my client maintains he was not the driver." Elena's eyes widened in disbelief. She knew what she saw. She knew the sound of that engine. But Chase just sat there, tapping his fingers on the table next to those Lamborghini keys, treating the courtroom like a minor inconvenience in his otherwise perfect life. I looked at him and said, "Mr. Whitmore, this is a court of law, not a comment section." He chuckled. He actually chuckled at me. That sound hit me wrong. I've seen tough guys cry when they lose their license, and I've seen teenagers shake with fear, but I have never, ever tolerated laughter when another human being is talking about their struggle to survive. And that was the moment I knew this trial was about to become something much, much bigger. The assistant district attorney that morning was a man named Leonard Pike. He wasn't the elected district attorney, but he certainly acted like he was the only authority in the room. He wore a crisp, expensive suit with a perfect tie knot, and he walked with that fast, aggressive confidence, as if the courtroom belonged to him, and I was just a guest in his house. I've worked with hundreds of prosecutors over the years. Many are good, decent people seeking justice, but every now and then, one walks through those doors thinking their job isn't to find the truth, but simply to win at any cost. Pike called the witness, the delivery driver who had seen everything. His name was Darius Cole, just 24 years old, working for a local food delivery service to make ends meet. He testified that he was sitting at the light in his blue Toyota Corolla because his app told him to wait for a pickup. He saw the crash clearly. He saw the driver's face in the glow of the street light. He saw the defendant, Chase Whitmore, step out of the Lamborghini for a brief second, look at the damage with annoyance, and then jump back in and speed off. Darius pointed a shaking finger across the room. "That's him," he said. Chase's smile didn't even flicker. He just looked at Darius like he was looking at an insect on his windshield. And then Pike did something that I still think about to this day. Instead of letting the witness speak, Pike leaned in with his questions like a knife. and his voice dropped to a cold, menacing register. He said, "Mr. Cole, you deliver food, correct?" Darius nodded. "Yes." Pike continued. "So, you're used to being outside late, used to being around trouble." Darius blinked, confused. "I'm used to working," he replied honestly. Pike nodded dismissively, like he didn't even hear the answer. "And you have a prior contact with police, don't you? A disorderly conduct charge from 2019? Darius looked panicked. "That was a mistake. I paid a fine. It was years ago." Pike leaned closer, invading the young man's personal space. "A mistake? Sure. Now tell me, Mr. Cole, are you absolutely certain you want to accuse a man of Mr. Whitmore's standing? Because if you're wrong, that's perjury. That's a felony that can follow you for the rest of your life." The room went dead quiet. Elena's hands tightened on her folder until her knuckles turned white. Darius's throat moved as he swallowed hard. I saw it happen in real time. That shift in his eyes. That wasn't just nervousness. That was fear. This wasn't cross-examination. This wasn't testing credibility. This was a threat disguised as legal procedure. It was the exact kind of bullying that makes honest people second-guess themselves because they don't speak the language of the court. They don't know the rules. They just know someone in a suit is warning them to shut up. Chase Whitmore's smile got bigger, realizing he had an ally in the system. I felt a fire rise in my chest. I said, "Mr. Pike," he kept going, ignoring me completely. "Because you understand, Mr. Cole, if you're lying here today, I can recommend charges. I can." I slammed my hand on the bench. "Mr. Pike, stop." He paused, looking almost surprised that I had interrupted his performance. I stared him down and said, "Step back from the witness." He stepped back, but his face tightened with irritation. "Your Honor, I'm simply advising the witness," he said smoothly. I leaned forward, my voice leaving no room for argument. "No, you're not advising. You're intimidating." The assistant district attorney that morning was a man named Leonard Pike. He wasn't the elected district attorney, but he certainly acted like he was the only authority in the room. He wore a crisp, expensive suit with a perfect tie knot, and he walked with that fast, aggressive confidence, as if the courtroom belonged to him, and I was just a guest in his house. I've worked with hundreds of prosecutors over the years. Many are good, decent people seeking justice. But every now and then, one walks through those doors, thinking their job isn't to find the truth, but simply to win at any cost. Pike called the witness, the delivery driver who had seen everything. His name was Darius Cole, just 24 years old, working for a local food delivery service to make ends meet. He testified that he was sitting at the light in his blue Toyota Corolla because his app told him to wait for a pickup. He saw the crash clearly. He saw the driver's face in the glow of the streetlight. He saw the defendant, Chase Whitmore, step out of the Lamborghini for a brief second, look at the damage with annoyance, and then jump back in and speed off. Darius pointed a shaking finger across the room. "That's him," he said. Chase's smile didn't even flicker. He just looked at Darius like he was looking at an insect on his windshield. And then Pike did something that I still think about to this day. Instead of letting the witness speak, Pike leaned in with his questions like a knife, and his voice dropped to a cold, menacing register. He said, "Mr. Cole, you deliver food, correct?" Darius nodded. "Yes." Pike continued. "So, you're used to being outside late, used to being around trouble." Darius blinked, confused. "I'm used to working," he replied honestly. Pike nodded dismissively, like he didn't even hear the answer. "And you have a prior contact with police, don't you? A disorderly conduct charge from 2019. Darius looked panicked. "That was a mistake. I paid a fine. It was years ago." Pike leaned closer, invading the young man's personal space. "A mistake? Sure. Now tell me, Mr. Cole, are you absolutely certain you want to accuse a man of Mr. Whitmore's standing? Because if you're wrong, that's perjury. That's a felony that can follow you for the rest of your life." The room went dead quiet. Elena's hands tightened on her folder until her knuckles turned white. Darius's throat moved as he swallowed hard. I saw it happen in real time. That shift in his eyes, that wasn't just nervousness, that was fear. This wasn't cross-examination. This wasn't testing credibility. This was a threat disguised as legal procedure. It was the exact kind of bullying that makes honest people second guess themselves because they don't speak the language of the court. They don't know the rules. They just know someone in a suit is warning them to shut up. Chase Whitmore's smile got bigger, realizing he had an ally in the system. I felt a fire rise in my chest. I said, "Mr. Pike." He kept going, ignoring me completely. "Because you understand, Mr. Cole, if you're lying here today, I can recommend charges. I can." I slammed my hand on the bench. "Mr. Pike, stop." He paused, looking almost surprised that I had interrupted his performance. I stared him down and said, "Step back from the witness." He stepped back, but his face tightened with irritation. "Your Honor, I'm simply advising the witness," he said smoothly. I leaned forward, my voice leaving no room for argument. "No, you're not advising. You're intimidating." Elena turned the phone toward the clerk, her hand steady now. The clerk walked it over to the large screen we use for evidence display. The image popped up, larger than life. It was a video. A bright green dashboard, the unmistakable Bull logo on the steering wheel. Music was blasting bass so heavy it vibrated even through the courtroom speakers. The camera panned down to the speedometer, 72 miles per hour, in a residential zone. And there, written in bold white text over the video, was the caption, "Providence roads are my runway." The courtroom went dead silent. You could feel the collective intake of breath, but Elena wasn't done. She scrolled to the next story. This one was a selfie video. The camera angle was perfect, capturing Chase Whitmore's face clearly against the high-end leather interior. He was laughing. "Some broke car tried to kiss my bumper," he said to the camera, his voice dripping with amusement. "I'm out." Then he made a mocking kissing sound at the lens. And then came the sentence that made my stomach turn. He looked directly into the camera and said, "If you can't afford repairs, don't park near rich people." Elena's eyes watered, tears finally spilling over, but she didn't look away. That woman had more dignity in her tear-stained face than Chase had in his entire existence. Chase's lawyer turned pale. He looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Even Pike's eyes widened. For the first time all morning, the arrogant prosecutor realized he wasn't the smartest guy in the room. The evidence had outpaced his bullying. I knew right then, this wasn't just a traffic case anymore. This was a character case. I looked at Chase. "Mr. Whitmore, do you deny this is your Instagram account?" Chase leaned forward, not with shame, but with defiance. "So what? It's a joke. People joke online all the time." I stared at him, unblinking. "A joke is when both sides laugh, Mr. Whitmore. Nobody here is laughing." He rolled his eyes. A gesture so disrespectful it made my clerk gasp. "Judge, you wouldn't get it," he sneered. "You probably never even drove a car like that." And then he looked right at me, with that specific look people use when they think money is the only measure of a human being's worth. He said it clear as day. "No offense, but you look like you still clip coupons." The courtroom gasped. My bailiff took a step forward. The air left the room. It was the kind of insult meant to belittle, to remind me that in his world, I was nothing but a civil servant in a robe. I didn't move. I didn't yell. I didn't bang my gavel. I've learned over 40 years that anger is loud, but control is louder. I let his words hang in the air for a long, uncomfortable moment. "Mr. Whitmore," I said, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "My father clipped coupons. My mother clipped coupons. They did it so their children could eat. They did it so I could go to law school. So if you think that insult lands on me, it doesn't. It lands on you." I leaned in closer. "But you just taught me something very important about your heart." And then, just as Chase sat back with that smug look of superiority, the heavy oak doors at the back of my courtroom swung open. It wasn't a subtle entrance. The sound echoed like a thunderclap, stopping every whispered conversation in the room. Two people walked in. They weren't regular court officers in blue uniforms. They weren't local police. They wore suits, but not the flashy, expensive kind Chase wore. These were dark, tailored, funky suits. Their faces were calm, the terrifying kind of calm that comes from having absolute authority. One of them, a woman with sharp eyes and a posture like steel, stepped past the bar without asking permission. She walked straight to my clerk and handed over a business card. My clerk's eyes widened, and she immediately passed it up to me. I read the name, Special Agent Mara Hines. Beside the name was the seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I looked up over my glasses. Agent, what is the purpose of your presence in my courtroom? The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Agent Hines turned to face the defense table. Your Honor, she said, her voice clear and carrying to the back row. We are here regarding Mr. Teen, Chase Whitmore, and a pending federal matter. We were monitoring this proceeding because the witness intimidation issue raised here today intersects with an ongoing federal investigation. Chase's smile disappeared so fast it was like someone had slapped it off his face. His skin turned a shade of gray I've only seen on people realizing their life is over. His lawyer shot up out of his chair, knocking it back against the rail. Your Honor, I object. This is a traffic hearing. I request a sidebar immediately. Agent Hines didn't even look at the lawyer. She looked at me. No need, Your Honor. The warrant is already signed. The word warrant hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Elena covered her mouth with her hands, tears stopping in shock. Darius looked like he couldn't breathe. Chase stood up halfway, looking for an exit that didn't exist, his legs shaking so bad he had to grab the table to keep from falling. Agent Hines continued, relentless, Mr. Whitmore is under investigation for insurance fraud, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. But specifically relevant to this court, there is evidence of a coordinated social media campaign to harass, dox, and silence witnesses in multiple incidents involving high-end vehicles registered to shell companies. And then she turned her gaze slowly, deliberately, to the prosecutor's table. She looked right at Leonard Pike, including actions that mirror the intimidation tactics we witnessed in this courtroom today. Pike's face went white. He dropped his pen. For the first time in his career, the bully was the one being hunted. He realized in that split second that it wasn't just Chase who had crossed a line. Pike had used his authority to scare a witness, and a federal agent had been standing in the back of the room, taking notes on every word he said. I looked at Pike, and for once, I didn't have to raise my voice. Mr. Pike, I said, did you think my courtroom didn't have eyes? He stammered, Your Honor, I was only zealously representing the state. Save it, I cut him off. You will save it for the record, and you will save it for your ethics board hearing. Agent Hines then produced a stack of printed screenshots. Your Honor, these are timestamps from Mr. Whitmore's private group chats, March 2nd, 11:03 p.m., March 3rd, 12:14 a.m. Posts mocking the victim, posting photos of her license plate, and encouraging followers to scare her off. This wasn't a joke. This was a strategy. Chase's lawyer put his head in his hands. The game was up. The traffic accident was just the tip of a very large, very dirty iceberg. Agent Hines held up the stack of papers, and even from where I sat, I could see the density of the data. Rows of timestamps, chat logs, and location pings. Chase's lawyer put both hands flat on the table, his head hanging low, the universal gesture of a man who knows his client has led him off a cliff. Chase, however, was still trying to fight gravity. He stammered, his voice rising in pitch. This is insane. I didn't do that. Someone hacked me. You can't prove that was me typing, Agent Hines replied. Calm as a frozen lake, Mr. Whitmore. We have your device ID. We have your IP logs from your home Wi-Fi and the cellular data from your phone matching the GPS location of the crash site. And we have the messages you sent 5 minutes ago from the bathroom during recess, telling your friends to, and I quote, delete everything before the old man in the robe figures it out. The courtroom gasped. The old man in the robe. That was me. Chase looked at me, terror finally replacing the smugness in his eyes. The words device ID and IP logs might sound like foreign languages to some people, but in a courtroom, they translate to one thing: receipts, real ones, undeniable ones. I looked at Chase and said, Mr. Whitmore, you thought this was a joke. You thought this was just traffic court. You thought a nurse and a delivery driver were easy targets because they didn't have your bank balance. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. I continued, And you thought you could insult me because you believe money is rank. Well, let me tell you something about rank. Rank is earned by character, not bought at a dealership. I turned my attention to the delivery driver, Darius, who was staring at the federal agents like they were angels sent from above. Mr. Cole, I asked gently, did you feel threatened by what the prosecutor said to you earlier? Did you feel that if you told the truth, you would be punished? Darius hesitated for a second, then nodded firmly. Yes, Your Honor. I was scared I'd lose my job. I was scared he'd put a felony on me for nothing. I looked at Pike again. He was staring at his shoes. Mr. Pike, look at me. He slowly raised his head. That is unacceptable. You are an officer of this court. Your duty is to justice, not to convictions, and certainly not to aiding the intimidation tactics of a wealthy defendant. Pike tried to speak. Your Honor, I cut him off. No, you will remain silent until I finish. When I took this job 40 years ago, I swore an oath to protect the integrity of this bench. That means a witness can come in here and tell the truth without being treated like a criminal for doing the right thing. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. I turned back to Chase. Mr. Whitmore, you are not just facing a traffic matter today. You are facing the consequences of your choices, your arrogance, and your cruelty. And before the federal agents take you into custody, this court still has jurisdiction over the hit and run and the contempt you've shown here. Chase's lawyer whispered, Your Honor, in light of federal involvement, we request a continuance. Denied, I said instantly. We will proceed on what is before this court right now. Justice delayed is justice denied, and Miss Marquez has waited long enough. Agent Hines stepped back to the wall, arms crossed, signaling she was willing to wait. She didn't need to speak anymore. Her presence alone validated everything my gut had told me from the moment I saw those Lamborghini keys on the table. Now, here is the part that felt like poetic justice. Elena didn't want him ruined. She didn't ask for jail. She wanted him to understand. I asked her, Miss Marquez, what would justice look like to you right now? She stood up, her hands no longer shaking. I just want my car repaired so I can get to work, she said softly. And I want him to stop. I don't want him to do this to anyone else. That is how good people talk. They don't ask for blood. They ask for safety. So I made the sentence hurt exactly where it should. I looked at Chase and said, I am ordering full restitution in the amount of $1,746.12 to be paid directly to Elena Marquez within 30 days, not to the court, to her. Chase nodded quickly, thinking he could just write a check and walk away, but I wasn't done. For your contempt of this court and your behavior toward these witnesses, I am imposing the maximum fine allowed by law, and I am ordering you to perform 200 hours of community service. He started to relax, probably imagining he could buy his way out of it. I leaned forward. But not just any service. You will complete your hours at Rhode Island Hospital, Miss Marquez's workplace. You will work in the patient transport and facility support unit. You will report 2 nights a week from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. You will wear plain scrubs, no designer logos, no Rolex, no Gucci belt. Chase's head snapped up. That's not fair, he blurted out. Fair? I asked. Fair is a nurse working a 12-hour shift to save lives and still having to chase down justice because someone with money couldn't be bothered to stop. That is fair. He opened his mouth to argue, but Agent Hines stepped forward. Mr. Whitmore, you will also come with us immediately after this proceeding to be processed on the federal warrant. That was the moment reality finally hit him like a wall. His shoulders dropped. His expensive hoodie suddenly looked like a costume that didn't fit anymore. And Pike sat down heavily, the air leaving his body, realizing that threats don't just hurt the witness, they poison the career of the prosecutor who makes them. As the federal agents moved in, Chase turned toward Elena. His voice cracked, stripped of all arrogance. Can we just settle? I'll pay double. Elena looked at him with tired, honest eyes and said the line that landed heavier than any sentence I could give. I didn't want your money. I wanted you to act like we matter. They led him away in handcuffs, and there, sitting on the defense table, abandoned and useless, were those Lamborghini keys, a shiny symbol of how fast the world can flip when the truth shows up with receipts. I stayed on the bench for a moment, watching Elena gather her folder, watching Darius exhale like he had been holding his breath for an hour. After 40 years, I can tell you this: justice isn't just about punishment, it's about balance. It's about telling the strong, you do not get to crush people. And it's about telling the scared, you are safe here. My father used to tell me, Frank, your name is all you have. Chase Whitmore had money. He had cars. He had clout. But that day in my courtroom, he was bankrupt where it mattered. If you ever have to tell the truth in a room where power is trying to scare you, stand firm. There are still people who will step between you and the threat. I will. And so will any judge who remembers why the robe matters.